The day she walked into my office was the day everything changed. I was troubleshooting a critical server failure, sweating despite the air conditioning, thinking only about finishing in time to pick up my daughter from school. I had no idea that within 24 hours, my life would flip upside down because of one sentence from the CO I'd only seen in company emails. My name is Charles Rasco. I'm 29 years old. For 4 years, I've worked as a senior technician at Wallace Global Technologies while raising my daughter Beverly alone in our small house on Rainey Street in East Austin. It's not glamorous. I live in a modest 2-bedroom home in a neighborhood being swallowed by luxury condos. Every morning I commute 20 minutes to Corporate Tower downtown, watching my paycheck struggle against Austin's rising costs. My wife left when Beverly was 2. One morning she walked out and never came back, leaving divorce papers in silence I'm still learning to fill. I stayed on Rainey Street because this house is the only stability Beverly has known. Selling was never an option, despite developers knocking weekly with cash offers. My life follows an exhausting pattern. Wake at 5:30, pack Beverly's lunch, drop her at school, work fixing problems for people who'll never know my name, then rush back before after school closes at 6 p.m. I'm not climbing any corporate ladder, but we survive. Before we continue, please tell us where in the world you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories travel, and it reminds us that hope and second chances are universal languages. That March afternoon seemed ordinary. It was unusually warm, close to 85 degrees, and the AC struggled to keep up. I wore my standard uniform, white polo with the Wallace Global logo and dark pants. I'd been in the server room 3 hours when my supervisor appeared looking uncomfortable. He said I needed to go to the executive floor immediately. Ms. Wallace had asked for me by name. In 4 years, I'd never been above the 15th floor. The elevator ride felt endless. My reflection showed what I was, a working-class tech in a rumpled polo heading into a world of corner offices and marble floors. When the doors opened and the system was waiting, she led me past glass-walled conference rooms and expensive art until we reached a door labeled Catherine Wallace, Chief Executive Officer. She knocked once and gestured me inside. The woman standing with her back to the Austin skyline wore a striking red blouse and white skirt, her short blonde curly hair perfectly styled. The office was enormous, probably 3 times my house's size, with floor-to-ceiling windows and furniture that belonged to museums. When she turned to face me, I expected corporate polish. Instead, beneath the power and control, I saw desperation. She thanked me for coming. I admitted I was wondering why I was there, trying to keep my voice steady despite being completely out of my element. She walked toward me, heels clicking on hardwood, stopping close enough that her expensive perfume mixed with the server dust smell on my shirt. Then she said something that made no sense. She needed a husband by tomorrow. Not just any husband, but a man who had everything to lose if he lied. According to her, that man was me. I stood in silence, trying to process her words. This couldn't be a joke. Her face showed she was completely serious. She explained about the stability clause in her father's will, requiring her to be married to maintain control of Wallace Global. Her stepbrother Damien had discovered her previous engagement had been dissolved 6 months ago. He was threatening an emergency board meeting to remove her as CEO unless she proved she was married within 24 hours. But there was more. Her nephew Marcus, a 7-year-old whose parents died in a car accident 8 months ago, needed custody. The family court judge was reluctant to award custody to a single woman with a demanding career, especially when Damien and his wife presented themselves as a stable married couple. Then the hostile takeover. Meridian Tech had been buying Wallace Global stock for 6 months, now 3% away from forcing a merger vote. Only a poison pill provision protected them, but only if the CEO was considered stable by the board. Finally, the scandal. Damien had manufactured rumors about an inappropriate relationship with a junior employee, planning to leak it the moment she failed to prove marriage. Even false. The accusation would damage her reputation enough for the board to question her leadership. She'd spent a week having her legal team investigate every unmarried male employee, looking for specific criteria: stable employment history, spotless reputation, financial need that would make the arrangement believable, and most importantly, a reason to stay honest. When they found my file, saw I was a single father barely making ends meet while maintaining perfect work reviews and zero disciplinary actions, they knew they'd found their candidate. She offered me $2 million. $1 million up front, another after 1 year of marriage. In exchange, I'd sign a contract, marry her within 24 hours, and maintain the appearance of a real relationship for at least 1 year. After that, we'd quietly divorce and go our separate ways. $2 million would change everything for Beverly and me. It would pay off the house, cover Beverly's college fund, and give us financial security I'd never dreamed possible. But something about the whole situation felt wrong. This wasn't just about money or contracts. This was about a woman so desperate and isolated that she had to buy a husband from her own employee pool. I looked at Catherine Wallace standing in her expensive office with her perfect hair and designer clothes, and I saw someone just as trapped as I was, just in a different kind of cage. She'd built an empire but had no one she could trust. I'd built a home but couldn't afford to keep it much longer. Then I made a decision that surprised both of us. I told her I'd marry her, but only if she moved into my house on Rainy Street that night. If we were selling this marriage to the world, she'd have to live it in my world first. No drivers, no assistants, no corporate safety net. She'd wake up in my 2-bedroom house, meet my daughter, and learn what real life looked like outside glass towers. She stared at me for a long moment, probably trying to decide if I was serious. Then she did something I didn't expect. She agreed. But she had one condition. Her chief legal counsel, Elena Vance, would handle the contract and verify our living arrangement to ensure everything was legitimate for the board. I agreed, not knowing Elena Vance would become the biggest threat we'd face. At that moment, standing in that expensive office high above Austin, I thought the danger came from Damien and his board meeting. I had no idea the real enemy was already inside the gates. Kathy Wallace arrived at my Rainy Street house at 9 p.m., carrying a single suitcase, and wearing jeans I suspected she bought that afternoon specifically for this occasion. She looked completely out of place standing on my porch, like a magazine cover that had wandered into the wrong neighborhood. When I opened the door, she hesitated for just a moment before stepping inside, and I wondered if she was having second thoughts about the whole arrangement. Beverly was already asleep, which I was grateful for. I'd spent the past 3 hours trying to figure out how to explain to a 6-year-old that the CEO of my company was moving in with us tomorrow. I decided to wait until morning and let Kathy be there for the conversation. If we were going to sell this marriage to the world, we'd need to sell it to Beverly first. I showed Kathy to my bedroom, explaining I'd sleep on the couch. She started to protest, saying she could take the couch, but I cut her off. If anyone from her company came checking, they'd expect us to share a bedroom. She'd take the master bedroom, I'd take the couch, and we'd figure out the details as we went. The house felt smaller with her in it. Not in a bad way, just different. I was used to it being just Beverly and me, our routines and rhythms established over 4 years. Now there was a stranger in designer jeans standing in my kitchen, looking at the dishes in my sink and the drawings Beverly had taped to the refrigerator like she'd landed on an alien planet. She asked if she could make tea. I told her to help herself, then watched as she opened cabinet after cabinet looking for cups and tea bags, clearly in use in navigating a kitchen where she couldn't just ask an assistant to bring her things. I almost helped her, but stopped myself. This was part of the deal. If she was going to live here, she'd need to learn how things worked in the real world. The next morning, Beverly woke up early as usual and came running into the living room, stopping short when she saw me on the couch. Before she could ask questions, Kathy emerged from the bedroom wearing one of my old T-shirts and looking more human than I'd ever seen her. Her hair was messy, her face bare of makeup, and for the first time I could see the exhaustion she'd been hiding beneath all that corporate polish. Beverly stared at her with the kind of direct curiosity only 6-year-olds can manage. I made the introduction simply. This was Miss Kathy, and she'd be staying with us for a while. Beverly accepted this with the easy adaptability of children, immediately asking Kathy if she knew how to make pancakes. What followed was both comical and somehow touching. Kathy admitted she'd never actually made pancakes from scratch. Beverly, who'd been helping me cook since she was 4, immediately appointed herself teacher. I watched from the doorway as my 6-year-old daughter instructed a billionaire CEO on the proper way to mix batter and flip pancakes without burning them. By the time breakfast was ready, something had shifted. Kathy wasn't the polished executive from yesterday. She was just a woman laughing at her own cooking mistakes, while a little girl patiently explained that you had to wait for bubbles before flipping. Beverly was charmed. More importantly, Kathy seemed genuinely happy in a way I hadn't seen in our brief acquaintance. Over the next few days, a routine developed. Kathy woke early and helped Beverly get ready for school. She learned the route to the school, the names of Beverly's teachers, and the unspoken rules of the morning rush. In the afternoons, while I worked, she picked Beverly up from after school and helped with homework. In the evenings, she read bedtime stories with voices and enthusiasm that made Beverly giggle. I watched this transformation with a mixture of surprise and wariness. Part of me wondered if it was all performance, if she was just that good at playing whatever role the situation required. But there were moments, small ones, that felt too genuine to be fake. The way she listened intently when Beverly talked about her day. The patience she showed when teaching Beverly to braid hair. The tears in her eyes when Beverly casually said she wished her mommy could be like Miss Kathy. Meanwhile, the corporate machinery ground forward. Elena Vance called daily with updates on the marriage logistics. We'd have a small civil ceremony at the courthouse the following Monday, with just Elena and one witness present. The marriage license was being expedited. The board meeting where Damien planned to challenge Kathy's position was scheduled for Wednesday, giving us just enough time to establish legal marriage before he made his move. Elena visited the house twice that week, ostensibly to verify our living arrangement and prepare final contract details. She seemed professional and supportive, asking questions about our daily routine and taking photos for documentation. She interviewed Beverly briefly, asking if she liked having Miss Kathy living with them. Beverly's enthusiastic response seemed to satisfy whatever checklist Elena was working from. What I didn't see, what neither Kathy nor I could have known, was what Elena did during those visits. While Kathy and I were in the kitchen going over contract details, Elena excused herself to use the bathroom. On her first visit, she noted the location of my home office and the computer I use for occasional freelance work. On her second visit, she excused herself again, this time carrying a small device in her pocket. The device took her less than 3 minutes to install. It was a small USB adapter that plugged into the back of my computer tower, hidden behind a tangle of cables where no one would notice unless they were specifically looking. The device created a backdoor into my network, giving anyone with the access codes the ability to control my computer remotely, access my files, and make it appear that any activity was coming from my IP address. Elena took photos of my workspace, supposedly for verification purposes. She noted the model of my router, the layout of my networking equipment, and the security camera system I'd installed after a neighborhood break-in the previous year. She was friendly and professional throughout, complimenting the house and saying how nice it was to see Kathy looking so relaxed and happy. After she left, Kathy commented that Elena had been her most trusted advisor for 6 years. Elena had helped build Wallace Global's legal department from scratch. She'd been there through every crisis, every board challenge, every difficult decision. Kathy trusted Elena more than anyone else in the company, maybe more than anyone in her entire life. I had no reason to doubt that trust. Elena seemed competent and loyal. The way she handled the marriage logistics was efficient and professional. When she suggested adding additional clauses to protect both Kathy's and my interests, I was impressed by her thoroughness. When she recommended we create a separate bank account for our household expenses to make the financial arrangement look more legitimate, I thought it was smart planning. I didn't know that every conversation we had with Elena was being reported directly to Damien. I didn't know that the separate account recommendation was designed to create a paper trail that could later be used against us. And I definitely didn't know that the little USB device now sitting behind my computer tower would soon be used to frame me for corporate espionage that could send me to prison. That Friday evening, a week after Kathy had moved in, we sat on the couch after Beverly was asleep, sharing a bottle of wine I'd bought to celebrate signing the final marriage contract. Kathy looked different than she had that first day in her office. More relaxed, more real, more like someone I could actually imagine building a friendship with, if not something more. She thanked me for making the past week easier than she'd expected. She admitted she'd been terrified that first night, worried that Beverly would hate her or that she'd fail so completely at normal life that the whole arrangement would collapse. Instead, she discovered something she'd never experienced before, the feeling of being part of family, even a pretend one. I told her it didn't feel as pretend as I'd expected. She smiled at that, a real smile that reached her eyes, and for just a moment I wondered what would happen if this arrangement became something more than a business transaction. We didn't know that across town, Damien and Elena were meeting in a private office, reviewing the photos Elena had taken of my home computer setup and discussing the final details of their plan. We didn't know that Monday's marriage ceremony would be the last peaceful day we'd have before everything exploded. We just sat there on my worn couch in my small house, drinking cheap wine and feeling like maybe, despite all the complications, we'd found something worth protecting. Listen, if you've made it this far in the story, you're invested. You want to know what happens to them. But here's the thing. Most people scroll past these stories without subscribing. They watch, they enjoy, and they disappear. If this story matters to you, if you actually care how it ends, hit that subscribe button, please. It takes 2 seconds. And if you don't, you'll probably forget about this channel and never another amazing story from me. The marriage ceremony was quick and anticlimactic. Kathy wore a simple white dress she'd bought at a department store. I wore the one suit I owned, and Elena stood as our witness with a practiced smile that I now know was hiding betrayal. The courthouse clerk rushed through the standard vows. We signed the papers, and just like that, Catherine Wallace became Catherine Rasco. The whole thing took less than 15 minutes. Beverly had been excited about having a wedding, disappointed when we explained it would just be a quick courthouse visit. To make up for it, we took her to her favorite ice cream place afterward, where she insisted on telling everyone that her daddy just married Miss Kathy, and now they were a real family. Kathy handled the attention with surprising grace, even when Beverly insisted on taking selfies to show her friends at school. For 2 days, everything seemed fine. We maintained our routine. Kathy went to the office during the day. I worked my usual shifts, and in the evenings we played the role of a newly married couple so well that I sometimes forgot we were playing at all. Beverly was happier than I'd seen her in years. Kathy seemed lighter, laughing more easily and sleeping better than she admitted she had in months. The board meeting where Damien had planned to challenge Kathy's position was scheduled for Wednesday afternoon. That morning, Kathy left for the office early, confident that the marriage certificate would be enough to shut down Damien's challenge. Elena had filed all the necessary documentation with the board, and Kathy's lawyer had confirmed that everything was legally sound. The stability clause was satisfied. The custody hearing was scheduled the following month, and the judge had already indicated the marriage would weigh favorably. The hostile takeover threat was neutralized. Everything seemed to be falling into place. Then, at 11:30 a.m., everything exploded. I was in the Wallace Global Tech Department finishing a routine maintenance task when my supervisor appeared with 2 security guards and a man in a suit I didn't recognize. The man identified himself as Wallace Global's chief security officer and informed me that I was being suspended pending investigation of a serious security breach. He was professional but firm, I needed to surrender my access badge, my company laptop, and leave the building immediately. I asked what this was about. He told me that during a routine security audit, they discovered that confidential company data, including merger documents and proprietary technology blueprints, have been accessed and transmitted from my home IP address over the past week. The timestamp showed the activity occurred during evening hours, when I would have been home. The log showed the files were accessed using backdoor protocols commonly used in corporate espionage. I insisted I hadn't done anything, that I barely used my home computer except for occasional personal tasks. He said the evidence was clear and that the company's legal team would be in contact. He also mentioned, almost casually, that depending on what the investigation revealed, law enforcement might become involved. I called Kathy immediately. She didn't answer. I called Elena, who picked up on the first ring, and sounded genuinely concerned. She said she'd heard about the security breach investigation and was already looking into it. She advised me not to panic, to go home, and to not touch my home computer until she could arrange for an independent forensics expert to examine it. I drove home in a daze, trying to understand what was happening. Someone had used my computer to steal company data, or at least made it look that way. But who had access to my home system? The only people who'd been in my house in the past week were Kathy, Beverly, and Elena. When I arrived home, I went straight to my computer and saw nothing obviously wrong. Everything appeared normal. But I'm a technician, not a cybersecurity expert. If someone had installed something sophisticated enough to fool Wallace Global Security Systems, I wouldn't necessarily spot it with a casual inspection. Kathy called back 30 minutes later, her voice tight with controlled fury. She'd been pulled out of a meeting by Damien, who presented the board with evidence of the security breach and demanded an emergency session to address it. He wasn't just accusing me of corporate espionage. He was implying that Kathy had married me specifically to gain access to company systems, suggesting our entire marriage was a scheme to steal company secrets for a competitor. The board had given Kathy until end of business day to respond. Damien was demanding she immediately file for annulment and publicly distance herself from me, or step down as CEO to protect the company's reputation. He'd already leaked the story to a business reporter he was friendly with. By tomorrow morning, the headlines would be everywhere. Wallace Global CEO's new husband accused of corporate espionage. I felt sick. This wasn't just about me losing my job or facing legal trouble. This was about destroying Kathy's credibility, making her look foolish or corrupt, giving Damien exactly the ammunition he needed to take control of the company. And the timing was perfect. We'd been married for exactly 2 days, just long enough to make it look suspicious, but not long enough to establish any real credibility. Kathy came home early, something she never did. She looked exhausted and frightened in a way I'd never seen before. She said Elena was working on a defense strategy, but the evidence was damning. The files had definitely been accessed from my IP address. The timestamps correlated with times when only I would have been home, even if I was innocent, proving it would be difficult and time-consuming, and we didn't have time. I told her there had to be an explanation, that someone must have planted something on my computer. She asked who would have had access. I started to answer, then stopped. The only person outside our household who'd been in my office was Elena. Kathy immediately dismissed the idea. Elena had been her most trusted advisor for 6 years. Elena had helped set up this entire arrangement. Elena had nothing to gain from betraying her. I pointed out that Elena had been alone in my office twice, that she'd specifically asked to see my work setup, that she'd been the one handling all the verification documentation. Kathy's face went pale. She grabbed her phone and started scrolling through messages. She pointed out that Elena had been unusually interested in the specific timing of when I was home, had asked detailed questions about my computer usage patterns, had recommended specific security measures that now seemed designed to create vulnerability rather than protection. I went to my computer and started pulling it apart, checking every connection, every component. That's when I found it. A small USB device hidden behind my tower, plugged into a port I rarely used, camouflaged by the tangle of cables. I held it up to show Kathy. She recognized it immediately as a corporate backdoor device, the kind used by IT security teams for remote administration. We sat there in my small office, staring at this tiny piece of hardware that had nearly destroyed everything. Then I had an idea. If this device gave someone backdoor access to my system, that access might still be active. If I was careful, I might be able to trace where the control signals were coming from and when they'd been used. I spent the next 3 hours diving into system logs, network traffic, and access records while Kathy made calls to lawyers and board members. What I found was damning. The device had been installed exactly 1 week ago, during Elena's second visit to our house. The stolen files had been accessed through it every evening, timed to match when I would normally be home. But the control signals, the commands telling the device what to do, were coming from an IP address that belonged to Wallace Global's legal department, specifically from Elena Vance's office workstation. Even more interesting, buried in the metadata, I found evidence that Elena and Damien had been communicating about the plan for weeks. Email fragments, chat logs, file transfers, all carefully deleted but not carefully enough. Elena had been feeding Damien information about Kathy's vulnerability, about the marriage arrangement, about every detail of our lives. She'd been the one to suggest this particular strategy because she knew it would work. But I still needed proof that would hold up in front of the board, proof that couldn't be dismissed as fabricated or circumstantial. That's when I remembered the security camera system I'd installed last year. I'd placed cameras covering the front and back doors, but I'd also placed one in the hallway, and its angle included a partial view into my office through the open door. I pulled up the footage from Elena's visits. The quality wasn't perfect, but it was clear enough. The timestamp showed Elena entering my office, approaching my computer, bending down behind the tower, where my camera couldn't quite see, then standing up a few minutes later and casually walking out. The timeline matched exactly with when the device logs showed it had been installed. Kathy and I looked at each other. We had evidence, but would it be enough? Would the board believe us over Elena, who had been with the company for 6 years? Would they see this as proof of innocence or as a desperate attempt to shift blame? Then Kathy smiled, and I saw the CEO I'd only glimpsed before. She had an idea, she said, a way to not just prove our innocence, but to expose Damien and Elena completely. It was risky, possibly even dangerous, but if it worked, we wouldn't have survived this attack. We'd end it permanently. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 4 p.m. in Wallace Global's main conference room. Kathy and I arrived at 3:45, walking to the lobby together while employees whispered and stared. By then, news of the security breach had spread throughout the company. Everyone knew that the CEO's brand new husband was being accused of corporate espionage. Half the staff looked at me with suspicion. The other half looked at Kathy with pity. Elena was already in the conference room when we entered, sitting next to Damien and looking perfectly composed. She even gave Kathy a sympathetic smile, playing her role as loyal advisor to the end. Damien looked confident, almost smug, probably already imagining himself in Kathy's office by the end of the week. The board members filed in, 12 men and women, who controlled the future of Wallace Global. They looked uncomfortable, the way people do when they're about to witness something unpleasant but necessary. Several of them avoided making eye contact with Kathy. One of them, an older man named Robert Chun, who'd been friends with Kathy's father, looked genuinely sad. The board chairman, a stern woman named Patricia Oakes, called the meeting to order and asked Damien to present his evidence. Damien stood and delivered a polished presentation, complete with slides showing the stolen files, network logs proving they'd been accessed from my IP address, timestamps demonstrating a pattern of theft, and expert testimony from the security team confirming the breach was deliberate and sophisticated. He concluded by stating the obvious. Either Kathy had been duped by a con artist who married her to gain access to company systems, or she was complicit in the theft herself. Either way, she demonstrated catastrophically poor judgment. For the good of the company, He was calling for an immediate vote to remove her as CEO and install interim leadership, pending a full investigation. Several board members nodded. This was exactly what Damien had planned. Make the evidence so overwhelming, the implications so dire, that the board had no choice but to act immediately. Patricia turned to Kathy and asked if she had anything to say in her defense. Kathy stood, and I saw several board members brace themselves for tears or excuses or desperate denials. Instead, Kathy's voice was calm and clear. She said she did indeed have something to say, but she preferred to show rather than tell. With Patricia's permission, she'd like to present some evidence of her own. Patricia looked surprised but nodded. Kathy pulled out her laptop and connected it to the conference room display. The first thing she showed was the footage from my home security camera, clearly showing Elena installing something behind my computer tower. Several board members leaned forward, squinting at the timestamp. Elena's expression didn't change, but I saw Damien shift uncomfortably in his seat. Damien immediately objected, claiming the footage could have been doctored or taken out of context. Elena added that she'd been in Charles's office as part of her verification duties, that she'd been checking the computer setup to ensure it met security standards for someone married to the CEO. It was a reasonable explanation, the kind that might have worked if that's all we had. But Kathy was just getting started. Next, she displayed the network logs I'd pulled from the backdoor device, showing the control signals coming from Elena's office workstation. She explained in simple terms that someone in Wallace Global's legal department had been remotely controlling my computer to steal company files and make it look like I was the thief. Elena's face finally showed a crack in composure. She argued that her workstation had obviously been compromised, that someone must have used her credentials to frame her. It was a weak defense, but it might have created enough doubt to muddy the waters. Then Kathy played her final card. She explained that once we discovered the backdoor device, we'd realized it created a unique opportunity. If Elena and Damien believed their plan was working, if they thought Kathy was cornered and desperate, they might reveal themselves by celebrating prematurely. So that morning, Kathy had sent Elena a private message saying she'd decided to accept Damien's demand. She was planning to file for annulment and announce her resignation at the board meeting. She asked Elena to meet her in the executive lounge at 3 p.m. to discuss the transition details. Elena had agreed immediately. What Elena didn't know was that Kathy had asked me to install a small recording device in the lounge, hidden in a decorative plant, set to activate at 3 p.m. Kathy hadn't gone to the lounge at all. Instead, Elena had gone alone, and 30 seconds later, Damien had arrived. Kathy clicked play on the audio recording. The first voice was Damien's, asking if Kathy had really agreed to step down. Elena confirmed it, saying Kathy had sounded defeated and broken. Damien laughed, and said he'd been planning this for 2 years but never expected it to work so perfectly. Elena's voice came next, cooler and more calculated. She said they needed to be careful with how they split control of the company once Kathy was gone. She reminded Damien that she'd taken all the risks by planning the device and providing the access codes. She expected her promised position as Chief Operating Officer, along with the stock options they'd discussed. Damien's voice assured her she'd get everything they'd agreed on. He said that within 6 months, Wallace Global will be merged with Meridian Tech, the company that had been attempting the hostile takeover. He'd been coordinating with Meridian the entire time, and they'd already promised him a board position and substantial compensation in the merged entity. Elena would come with him, of course. After all, they'd built this plan together. The recording continued for another 3 minutes, with Damien and Elena discussing the specific mechanics of how they'd been manipulating the board, suppressing information about Wallace Global's successful projects while highlighting any setbacks, creating the narrative that Kathy was unstable and unreliable. Elena revealed that she'd been the source of the manufactured scandal about Kathy having an inappropriate relationship. She created fake emails, planted rumors with gossip-prone employees, and even arranged for a tabloid reporter to start asking questions about Kathy's personal life. By the time the recording ended, Every board member was staring at Elena and Damien with expressions ranging from shock to fury. Elena had gone completely pale. Damien tried to argue that the recording was illegally obtained and couldn't be trusted, but his voice cracked mid-sentence. Patricia Oakes cut him off. She said that regardless of the recording's legal admissibility, the board had heard enough to warrant immediate action. She called for an emergency vote to remove Damien from the board and terminate Elena's employment, effective immediately. The vote was unanimous. Security escorted Damien and Elena from the building, while board members apologized to Kathy for doubting her. Robert Chun, her father's old friend, actually had tears in his eyes as he told her how proud her father would have been of how she'd handled the situation. The board also voted to strengthen the poison pill provisions protecting against hostile takeovers and to launch an investigation into Meridian Tech's attempted acquisition, which now appeared to have involved corporate espionage. My employment was immediately reinstated with a formal apology, and the company's lawyers assured me that all accusations would be cleared from my record. Kathy and I left the building together as the sun set over Austin, both of us exhausted but victorious. In the parking lot, she stopped and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. She said she'd been thinking about something over the past few hours. The marriage had started as a business arrangement, a solution to a corporate problem. But somewhere between making pancakes with Beverly and fighting off corporate betrayal, it had become something real. She wasn't sure exactly what that something was, but she knew she didn't want to end after 1 year. I told her I'd been thinking the same thing, that watching her read bedtime stories to Beverly, seeing her laugh at burned pancakes, defending our home against people who want to destroy us, somewhere in all of that, the pretending had stopped feeling like pretending. We drove home to Rainy Street together, to the small house that no longer felt quite so small. Beverly was waiting with a neighbor who'd been watching her, excited to hear about our day. We didn't tell her about the corporate espionage or the betrayal or the recordings. We just told her we'd had a big meeting at work, and everything turned out fine. That night, after Beverly was asleep, Kathy and I sat on the couch with wine, and exhaustion, and the strange, tentative feeling of people who'd survived something difficult together. We talked about the future, about whether we wanted to maintain the appearance of marriage or explore what real marriage might look like. We talked about custody hearings for Marcus and whether our small house had room for another child. We talked about mechanics of blending a billion-dollar CEO's life with a technician's world and whether such a thing was even possible. We didn't have all the answers. Maybe we'd never have all the answers. But we had something neither of us had expected when this whole arrangement began. We had each other, and we had a family worth fighting for. The marriage certificate might have started as a business transaction, but the commitment it represented had become real somewhere along the way. 3 months later, Marcus came to live with us. The custody hearing lasted less than an hour once the judge saw Beverly's drawings of her new brother's room and heard Marcus talk about how Miss Kathy, who he now called Aunt Kathy, helped with his nightmares about his parents. The judge awarded full custody, and Damien's appeal was denied. 6 months after that, we bought a bigger house, still on Rainy Street, with enough room for all of us. Kathy kept her position as CEO but hired better security and learned to trust her instincts about people. I got promoted to IT security director, using my experience with a backdoor device to overhaul Wallace Global Systems. Beverly and Marcus became inseparable, and our little makeshift family became just our family. No qualifiers needed. The marriage that began in desperation, sealed with contracts and suspicion, became something neither of us had dared to hope for. It became real. And somewhere in the chaos of blended families, corporate battles, and learning to trust again, we both discovered that sometimes the best partnerships are the ones you never saw coming. This story teaches us that authenticity and loyalty are worth more than power or position. Kathy Wallace had everything: wealth, status, control of a billion-dollar company. But she was vulnerable because she'd surrounded herself with people who valued position over principle. Charles Rasco had almost nothing by material standards, but his honesty and stability made him stronger than any corporate executive. The marriage that began as a transactional arrangement succeeded precisely because both parties chose to approach it with integrity rather than manipulation. Elena and Damien failed not because their plan was flawed, but because they underestimated the power of genuine partnership. When people face challenges together with honesty and mutual respect, they forge bonds that no amount of scheming can break. Trust isn't given freely. It's earned through consistent action, especially during difficult times. So here's the real question. Did you subscribe yet? Thousands of people will listen to this story and won't subscribe. Please don't be that person. Kindly support what I do here by subscribing. And then drop in the comment section if you like part 2. What challenges will they face as a new blended family? Let me know if you want to hear more.